Yeah, but today, so I want to talk about this event. So maybe half a year ago, I got an invitation to take part in I.N.S.E.C.T, which is this like a co-created, multi-species oriented event where people from different fields, mainly maybe architects and like material designer, we were maybe 2 or 3 people from human-computer interaction, teachers, practitioners came together to try to understand how can we kind of invite, but also better understand insects or kind of multi-species cohabitation, and how can we learn from this to design better, but also how can we just learn to live together in a more meaningful way. And so we got an invitation from a person whose name is Svenja Keune. I really recommend checking out her work because she does really cool things. She's currently a postdoc in somewhere in Denmark. And for example, the house that you can see here, that is her kind of place where she lives. It's a tiny house, but also where she kind of lives with her own experiments, with her own work. So she designed these like textile things and lets insects live in it, and then explores her own world, kind of how to foster these interactions and these entanglements. And so she stirred up this this event and invited people, and she invited us to not only take part, but she also invited us to kind of co-create, and steered up this event where we, yes, so she invited us to the Danish countryside where we could kind of spend almost 10 days hanging out together and kind of trying to understand, trying to understand each other and trying to understand ourselves and also the insects. This is just like one of the artifacts that we have made of the research summer camp. Like many of the things that we created or that were created for this purpose, this is not like someone kind of got a task or go and create a map. This was, you know, someone just had the need to kind of have an overview of the place and how it's going to look like. So then they created a map, then it kind of served the other people as well. And this was quite representative of how many of actually all the tasks emerged and how they were handled. There wasn't like one person who was kind of organizing everything. I mean, there was Svenja who kind of gave the intention and who invited us, but that was it. Then her role was more kind of like an inspiration, and she would help us with kind of practical things and fixing the actual camp where we were. I think this was here. Yes, this was like an old scout camp. So it was a building when some of us could stay, and but otherwise all the tasks were heavily dependent on the kind of self-organization and on, you know, if there was a need in the community for the thing to happen, then it happened. But there was no person kind of top-down overviewing everything and making sure things were happening. If there was no need, and if no one was there doing it, then it just didn't happen. And this was the kind of the space where we were. So there was the scout camp with the fireplace, there was a lake, there was a small like a camping place next to the pigs. So I had a tent, so I was tenting there. And then there was every time we could pass the pigs, you could say hi because they were very friendly. There was a barn where we organized some of the workshops, the house of the landlords, and then a weaving school, because the people are renting the place, and a lot of the people also interested in who were kind of participating were interested in textiles. And yeah, and I thought that like for me the most interesting things about this event were the self-organization, the multi-species, and then the physical environment. So as I said, so when it comes to the self-organization, as I said, there was no kind of, if you kind of contrast it to a typical conference, there was no kind of top-down like person who oversees everything and who makes sure that everything happens. Everything was kind of just steering up like from the bottom up. And we did have Zoom calls, and you know, we made a Miro to kind of start organizing ourselves. But yeah, again, this was more kind of like a useful tool for us to be able to organize ourselves. rather than someone would be like, okay, you have to make a mirror and you have to come to this Zoom call. That just didn't happen. At the same time, we didn't really have this distinction that there are like some invited speakers who are like the experts on things, and then now they're gonna kind of teach us about something. People did have talks, but all of us were invited to contribute with what we feel like we want to do and what we want to engage with. So there were for sure, like maybe more specific like talks or something, but then all of us, we were kind of taking part in the activities, and the whole schedule was based on our own kind of needs and like what we wanted to do and what we felt like doing. So it was a lot about kind of the events, and like the activities we were doing were a lot about based on the needs of the community. We as the participants, we also took care of everything. So we not only came there as, again, if you kind of think about regular conference, when you go there and then you go as a participant to talks, and then someone gives you food and makes you the coffee. Here we were the ones who had to figure out how we're going to make the food, figure out how to build our tents, how we're going to take care of the place that where we're staying. So it was really like a kind of summer camp vibe. This is why it's also called like this. But at the same time, we were also doing research and documenting and kind of exploring and like reflecting. So this combination of the kind of practical living together with all these multi-species. By the way, anyone is like disgusted by insects and images of them? I just realized I wanted to check. No, okay.
We love it.
Okay. No, but I mean, this was also one of the funny things, that we were there to kind of explore our relationship with other species and with insects. But at the same time, if you get bitten by a mosquito for like 10 times a day, you're going to have a very intense relationship with this one particular species. But this was also part of it. And we also discussed is that at the beginning, especially, we had like a very romantic view, and we kept on talking about building habitats together with insects and exploring these like co-design ideas. But then when you sit there and you see the mosquito, you're going to be like, ah! Which, yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, how does this? But we took these moments to kind of also like reflect over it, because it was a strong experience. Yeah, so I thought this kind of self-organization of the whole process was really interesting, and it was, for me as a person who's interested in participation and learning, it was so fascinating to see how things were working. When we got there for the first day, and I just saw this kind of organic chaos, I thought like we're gonna starve to death, because this is never gonna work. But then people made it work. Like, one person knew how to do this, and another person knew how to do this, and then through the interaction and through this kind of very intense interaction and like entanglement with the space and each other, we kind of make it work. And Svenja, when we were talking at the beginning, she said she would wish to experience us as an organism, and I thought this was it was really like this. We were this kind of like there was no head. It was like a blind organism that kept on kind of like doing things, but we did do things, and we managed to like make ourselves food, learn super many things, experience really, really cool things. Yeah, and we didn't starve to death. I promise. This we managed to fix that. Yeah, and then so a lot of the kind of thoughts we had about the other organisms, or like especially insects, which we try to understand, was somehow part of more than human design. Here I can recommend my colleague Anton, who just graduated. His thesis is within HCI, and it's a really, I think, interesting piece on kind of noticing nature and exploring this more than human-centered design in urban farming. So I recommend checking it out, also his papers. And these are some of the activities we did. For example, here we have brought like all sorts of different tools for noticing insects. So then I think this particular thing that you can see here, that's like a microscope that you can combine with your smartphone. So it's a box, and then you put your smartphone on it, and it's gonna you're gonna see the thing that's inside like super multiply. A person had also like a regular microscope, but we also had all sorts of like glasses that kind of distorted the vision. So that whatever you saw, it was kind of, like broken down. And then, yeah, we spent just an afternoon kind of having all sorts of objects from nature, both kind of dead, more like nature-based, but also insects themselves, and exploring like these like small details, but also just how we can kind of see differently and use this as an experience to kind of learn about the world in a different way. Here, this was the terrace when we had a lot of activities. So this was reading of this person was reading a book to us about, I think this is called Silent Earth, which is one, yeah, it's a pretty, it's basically a book kind of talks about like if all the insects went extinct, what are the consequences and how that would work. And I love again, if you kind of think about like a regular, talk during conference. So like one person is kind of laying down and just chilling. Everyone is kind of like relaxed. And this was the evening the sun was setting. You could, everyone was kind of tired from the whole day and we were just sitting there listening to the reading of the book. It was very inspiring, but also very relaxed. And it was such a different way. If you think about this context where we're sitting right now, right? Like there are these like artificial lights and all these like sharp edges and nothing that's actually like alive except us. So it's such a different context. Here where people are participating in making clay. So there was one person who was very interested in clays. She was a ceramic maker. And then she spent some time collecting clays and then people were making some sort of statues out of it. Me and Anton, we have made something that we called insect embodiment workshop, where we, through like a range of meditations and kind of more grounding techniques, explored ourselves. And based on this, we then started building these prototypes or like extensions. Here you can see the wings that the participant had built. I have had this like antennas and also the Svenja who's here, she had this like crazy knitted hat that looked like a spider of a sort. It was a bit clear, and through this we kind of try to exploring, okay, if we kind of try to change our bodies based on our understanding of insects, can we also change the way we understand them? The answer is no. But what we have learned much more was that you can learn so much more about you as a designer. And this is something that we kind of, it helped us to understand these like different types of knowledge that go into the design making, where we often, this kind of like hard scientific knowledge is prioritized, but then there are all sorts of different ways of knowing that you can actually use and you should use when designing with people, but also with different species. And yeah, we continue actually working. Right now, we're working on a Kai proposal, Kai workshop proposal towards this topic, because we would like to generate this further on. Here are some of the animals that we have seen, some of the insects. This was also one of the things that was kind of, there was no, we actually had one person who was making a documentary about the whole event, but then everyone had their phones and everyone just kept on kind of collecting notes and images, and but it wasn't somehow decided from the beginning how we're supposed to do this. This was dependent on people's moods, how they kind of wanted to do it. There was yeah, and now we're writing like kind of a catalog based on this experience. The activities also, what I liked, had like a very interesting kind of ripple effect, or like that even though we had some sort of ideas that we came there with, so even our perception, the workshop that we had, we actually, when we got there and we found out that the different group wanted to do something similar, so we merged our ideas. And then the meditation, that one we didn't plan for. There was just one of the people there, she was used to doing meditation, and she offered, do you want us to include it? And it was super nice to kind of see how the activities themselves kind of more like organically evolve, also if you let yourself kind of lose the control, because then people are going to do things that you maybe are kind of surprised by or maybe not comfortable with. But this was also part of it, to kind of let yourself experience this discomfort of like letting go and invite others, both other species, but also other people, to engage with you and try doing a thing together that maybe you are not ready for. This participant also, she was doing like dance based on bees. And then the glasses she's wearing, this is like from the previous picture that you saw where the person, so we kind of reuse the artifacts and reuse the ideas, and together we kind of we're creating this event. I'm, by the way, planning to do one of these embodiment workshops focused on plants in Gothenburg on the 18th October as part of the Sustainability Festival. So if anyone is interested in kind of experiencing like a meditative experience, and then we want to be making art based on the meditation experience and kind of, yeah. You have a question?
Yeah, more like a request. If you can send us details about this,
yes,
that'd be great.
I will.
So I think we can share it.
Yeah, definitely. I'm still trying to kind of figure out the details based on from the organizer side, but then I would definitely share it.
Yeah, thank you.
Here I wanted to also, so there was the multi-species, and then I wanted to show a little bit like the physical environment. And I mean, this is not something that's like super new, that physical environment impacts the way we learn. But here it was just so extreme, or like so visible, that how different it is when you are, and it's not only about learning about like multi-species or like different species that you're supposed to be on the place where they are, but we too are a species, and we too are like an organism that lives and that has like a very living properties. And if you keep on putting us in these boxes, like how can we learn something about the humans? I find it, after this experience, I kind of keep on thinking about it. So this is part of the camp. Here you can see it was like kind of half rundown building, but it didn't matter. It kind of more contributed to this like a explorative or like a freer way how to think. This was the terrace. We also had a bonfire. So the landlord, who is kind of professional farmer who has been running this ecological farm since maybe 20 years back. So, you know, instead of having like a talk when he stands in front of my PowerPoint, we just sat down around a bonfire, and then we talked, and he told us the stories about like what's connected to the place, and kind of could point it out to the spots that we have got to like know. It was such a difference. This is the place where I actually lived. So I think here, that's my tent, one of these. This was also very like interesting experience to kind of live very close to the insects, because I found like a huge tick in my in my tent a couple of times. But that's the thing, like it was so interesting to come there with this idea of like, oh, designing for insects or with insects, and then experience the insects in a very close proximity. This was the barn, like part of the barn where we were organizing workshop, and it made so much more sense. This one particular one was about kind of creating like future visions of cities, and how cities can be really address biodiversity in a meaningful way, not just like as some sort of topic that's outside, but to actually how to include all the different species into creation of the future cities. And it just made so much sense to do it when being in this kind of barn, when, you know, the sun is coming through, so you can kind of sense the weather. There were all these different insects or like animals kind of roaming around. And it just felt, the colors were kind of soft. The day was kind of, the light was kind of, you know, it was like a regular daylight, so different than this. So after this, I don't want to do ever workshop in other place than a barn. This was also nice. This was just like a spot when you could, there were two lakes, and this one was the unswimmable one, but it was still very socially intense. So then you could kind of go to this place where you were basically by yourself, and you can just sit on this. I could pretend I was like a lily pot and just like sit there and just like listen to the silence and just observe the plants out there. It was so nice to kind of also get yourself out from the intense context. Yeah. So I thought that like the lessons from me was, when it comes to the self-organization, the thing that was making the self-organization hard was to have like a strict idea of what's supposed to happen and how others are supposed to do it. And when I kind of could given up this idea, then things were actually kind of flowing, and it was possible to get stuff done, because it's only when people came there with like oh, it has to be like this, it has to be done by Monday, it has to have this and this things. It's hard if you kind of don't do it in this top-down way, but instead, if you kind of build it on the abilities and the needs and the wishes of the people, the thing kind of creates in more, it's created in a more organic way, but also much less controlled way. When it comes to the multi-species approach and the other species, I feel like we still have to learn so much. I always like to think about the an idea from an author who wrote a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, where she says, well, plants and insects and other animals have lived on planet for such a long time, and they have been doing it in a sustainable way because no one has destroyed the planet the way we did. So we need to learn from them, right? And it's not, when you look at a plant, how can I learn from this? Well, it's the plant know how to plant, but it's more also us to kind of, how do we help us to understand the plants, how they go about being a plant, to kind of learn for ourselves. And then I also thought that about the physical environment, and then it makes such a difference to kind of ground the learning experience in it, but both kind of conceptually, but also, yeah, just physically. Like, it was nice to spend so much time outside to be able to have conversations and to have like green stuff around it. We know that all these things are actually really good for us, and all these things that we have around us are actually bad for us. Yet we keep on building these things to learn in, instead of kind of taking us to places or creating places where it's good to learn from us. Yes. And I did like a small kind of Q&A, like ideas, because on one hand, this is when kind of thinking about like educational context, obviously this is not like an easy transition when you could just take whichever education and just like conduct it in a similar way. The question obviously, well, is this the effective way how to host an event? And I think the answer is no, but again, it depends on if effectivity is your goal. If you want to be the most effective in your learning, then this is not a good way. But maybe effectivity is not the thing that you actually want to achieve. Maybe you want to achieve the people have like the right experiences that can help them to make sense of the world and help them to learn about in the way it matches them, rather than having like ideas about more kind of like quantitative or like money-based ideas about what we are supposed to learn and how we're supposed to learn. The question of, was it stressful? Yes, it was stressful, but it was also very inspiring and beautiful. I also know that I wasn't the person included. I was part of the food group. So I was the one working with the food, where it was for sure stressful at the beginning. And like as after a couple of days, we could kind of learn to work together. But again, it was more about, yeah, if I had like kind of created expectations on myself that things have to be in some ways, instead of just letting go, I just kind of trying to make the best out of it and trying to make it work, and rather focusing on just the doing instead of how it's supposed to look like or how it's supposed to be. I also was reflecting over well, what if things don't get done? I really believe that if there is a need in the community does figure it out. If there is not a need in the community, it's not going to figure out. I'm pretty sure you could kind of push it to like some sort of edge cases where this wouldn't be true. Like if someone else would need a heart surgery, I'm pretty sure no one would be able to do a heart surgery. But when it comes to this kind of like living things, and design is a lot about living and about doing and about being human and being a species and reflecting over that. So I think there it's still, we can much more kind of, yeah, we can work with this much more, which is in line with, well, is this applicable to all education and events? The answer is no. But I do think the more context today could benefit from a similar approach, when we don't think about this like, okay, who's an expert and who's the one who's supposed to stand and talk, but kind of instead of kind of create and co-create this learning context for ourselves and our students so that we can engage in it. What if people misuse this approach and will just be lazy? Depends again on like what the goal is. We had definitely, when you kind of think about it, on communities of practices. So there was some sort of center of people most engaged in most activities. And then around that was like a broader group of people not super engaging. Some people kind of didn't have like a relevant background, but they just liked nature. But that also made sense for them to be there. And they contributed to the activities by taking part. There was one person who came there who does some sort of like a business informatics, who just said, I'm here to become a human again. And so he just kept on kind of walking around drinking beer and just chilling. But there's also, he was like a nice person to talk to, and he would go to the activities and help out when it was necessary. And there is also space for this. It was very difficult to kind of decide, like, is it not worth it for this person to be here? I mean, he judges it is, so it is. And yeah, so I thought this was also kind of interesting in terms of what kind of, because I understood like why he's there. And I think he really played a role in this, because he made us all aware of how much humans are we, and how much are we kind of just focused on like spitting out grants and articles. And in this space, there was also really bad internet. So we really had this focus bubble when we were doing something, no one was sitting on their phones. People were in the moment. And this was so intense, but it was also so good to all of us be like, okay, we're doing this thing. And when you have your hands dirty from like fermentation things or clay, you're not going to be checking your emails, because you're just going to get like clay everywhere. So like also again, this kind of physicality of all the experiences, it was really inspiring. And then finally, the money question. I mean, this one is a tricky one. I know that there was a funding for this event, which I think mainly covered the food. We were also paying a little bit, depending kind of who could have paid how much. But this is, we had put kind of a lot of emphasis on, okay, how can we avoid the buying, and how can we use the existing resources of what we have and what can be done. So, and I thought to kind of leave you with these questions that maybe we can discuss a little bit in terms of if you could choose, if you think about like your teaching activities or your learning activities, if you can choose where would you like them to take part? Where would you like, if you kind of could, imagine, is it like on a beach because you're like hanging out on the beach? Or is it in the depths of the forest? Or maybe it is in the city, but maybe it's somewhere different than a box. Where would that be? If you could include everyone that you actually want to include, like who would you include? I often, like something that we don't often think about, but talk about in design, because we always look at ourselves as humans. We have all these bacteria living inside of ourselves. Oh, like we are only bacteria, and they heavily impact our mood and in terms our competence. So if you have not the right bacteria on the day when you come to a workshop and you can't really participate or enable other people to participate, and we never we're just like, oh, the humans, like that's what we are. It's like, no, but there is so many more species included in this. So would you like to kind of invite to this conversation and to this like design and to this learning, if you could? And finally, like a more concrete question, can you imagine letting your students co-create their own materials or courses, and why yes and why not? And maybe which parts of the course would you think it's challenging for them to do? And which one you can imagine kind of letting go and letting the students do it? Yes, that was it.
Very wonderful and inspiring. I'm like, wow, this is like a new world opening up. So cool. So do we have some questions, or how do you want to